It was on a dreary night of November that I beheld the accomplishment of my toils. With an anxiety that almost amounted to agony, I collected the instruments of life around me, that I might infuse a spark of being into the lifeless thing that lay at my feet. It was already 1 in the morning, the rain pattered dismally against the panes, and my candle was nearly burnt out, when, by the glimmer of the half-extinguished light, I saw the dull yellow eye of the creature open. It breathed hard, and a convulsive motion agitated its limbs. How can I describe my emotions at this catastrophe? Or how delineate the wretch whom with such infinite pains and care I had endeavored to form? His limbs were in proportion, and I had selected his features as beautiful. Beautiful. Great God! His yellow skin scarcely covered the work of muscles and arteries beneath. His hair was of a luxurious black and flowing, his teeth of a pearly whiteness. But these luxuriances only formed a more horrid contrast with his watery eyes that seemed almost of the same color as the dun white sockets in which they were set, his shriveled complexion and straight black lips. The different accidents of life are not so changeable as the feelings of human nature. I had worked hard for nearly 2 years for the sole purpose of infusing life into an inanimate body. For this I had deprived myself of rest and health. I had desired it with an ardor that far exceeded moderation. But now that I had finished, the beauty of the dream vanished, and breathless horror and disgust filled my heart. That, my friends, is from Frankenstein. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Specifically, the 1818 text, published by Penguin. And it is your Sunday Penguin for today. So welcome, my friends, welcome to stately Vaughan Manor, when we're talking about Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, the 1818 text. So yeah, this is the first version. This is the version that she wrote when she was a young lady. This was revised when she was an older woman in 1831. I think she probably felt a bit embarrassed by some things in this version. I think at that point in her life, she realized that Frankenstein was going to be the thing that she was remembered for, and she wanted to change some things. She toned it down a little bit. She did change the tone of the story. The creation scene that was already ambiguous, she managed to make even more ambiguous. The whole thing about Victor Frankenstein sewing apart bodies and putting together a creature from hunks and chunks of corpses, that was from the films. Now, the raw materials did come from the vivisection room and the graveyard, but how Victor Frankenstein made uses of these materials, we have no idea. Like I said, it's pretty ambiguous. So that's one thing. Also, there were some other details. Victor Frankenstein's fiancée went from being his cousin to being his adopted sister. Not sure that's better, but that was a change that was made. So some minor changes, but it does change things in the text, and you notice it. This is the superior version, the version she created when she was young. This is the way it usually goes. When creative types want to change their creations later on in life, it almost always goes wrong. H.G. Wells tried it with The Sleeper Wakes, did not help that book. George Lucas, of course, tried it to ghastly results. I mean, even I would like to do it with my newbie tag. I would like to go back to my newbie tag and change the special effects and make them CGI instead of just practical effects. But you know what? I restrain myself, and I just keep my newbie tag the way it is. You know, that's what people should do. But she did change it. She revised it, which became the standard text. Of course, Penguin has that, and you can get it. And of course, I have it in a Penguin. This Penguin edition is good because the standard edition does have an appendix that tells you the differences between the text. So if you are curious about the differences between these two versions, you can get this version and it'll tell you. But this is the version that I prefer. Now, I have read Frankenstein, one version or the other, every couple of years since I was 15. I love this book. Now, I've avoided talking about it all this time on my channel because it's a book close to my heart. I didn't want to screw it up, but I've decided, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and screw it up. Because I saw another BookTube channel, the fantastic It's Too Late to Apologize, a great BookTube channel. You should all check out that channel. I'll link that video down below. She did a great version, a great review of Frankenstein's, and I thought, well, if she's going to do a good version, I should do a crappy version. And so that's what I'm doing. If you want to see a smart person talk about this book, go check out that video. But for now, you have to listen to me. So, I love this book. This book is about a lot of different things. It's about taking science too far. More importantly to me, it's about man's inhumanity to man, the capacity for some fathers to renege in their responsibilities, what can happen when you just get way too involved in your work and lose perspective, as Frankenstein did, and frankly, as a lot of us do. I've been guilty of that. I mean, I've never created any monsters, but, you know, I have been guilty of taking my work too seriously to the expense of the rest of my life. Frankenstein certainly does that. And as you see, things go wrong. He takes one look at the creature that he has created and bolts, leaving this monster to try to figure out things on its own. Now, this monster is a lot different from the monster you might be familiar with from the films. Certainly, when I first read this book as a teenager, I was really surprised because I was used to Boris Karloff. That was my idea of what the Frankenstein monster was. Bride of Frankenstein is still the best Frankenstein movie, by the way, as if you didn't know that already. But this creature is really intelligent. And the sad thing is if Frankenstein had just stuck around and spent some time to teach his creation some things and just help him along, this monster could have turned into a decent human being. Instead, he becomes a monster in truth. Doesn't just look like a monster, he becomes a monster because he was abandoned and because of some of the cruelty he experiences from his fellow men. He is a weird-looking creature. This is true. So people treat him like a monster. Now, he discovers, I'm not going to get into a lot of details in this book as far as the plot goes, because if you haven't read this, I want you to experience that for yourself. The way I experienced it. So many things in this book were just completely new to me. I didn't expect them. I didn't expect the whole way this book was written. It's a story within a story within a story. You get Frankenstein's story, you get the monster's account of what happened. It's written in a very interesting way. So I don't want to spoil some of this stuff because it's great. This is really interesting. The way it was written, it's gripping. It's a gripping narrative. You really feel, or at least I did, for the monster, despite the horrible things that this monster does. And this monster does horrible things. Horrible things Frankenstein's monster does. But, you know, you feel sorry for it. You do not feel sorry for Frankenstein. That guy, he might be the main character. You're supposed to feel some sympathy for Frankenstein. I don't feel much sympathy for Frankenstein. I never have. I never will. My sympathy is squarely with the monster, despite the monstrous things that it does. Now, Frankenstein, he just abandons this creature, tries to forget this creature, tries to forget he ever made this creature. But you know what? Frankenstein's monster is no dummy. This creature is a really articulate, really intelligent monster. The most dangerous kinds of monsters, which Frankenstein finds out to his dismay. Because this monster he finds out how he was created and who created him. So he goes to find his creator. And he wreaks a horrifying vengeance. I mean, this creature didn't want to mess with this thing, Frankenstein. Bad idea to mess with this monster. So this monster takes just a ghastly revenge. Does terrible things. And finally, the monster and Frankenstein come face to face. And that's when the monster tells Frankenstein his story, after he's done all these ghastly things in vengeance. And then we figure out why Frankenstein's monster does this stuff. Now, I will spoil one thing. Frankenstein's monster tries to convince Frankenstein to create a bride of Frankenstein, which is where the idea of Bride of Frankenstein came from. Things don't go well. I won't tell you how they don't go well, but they don't go well. And things get worse. This book, man, this book is a great horror novel. It's also credited as being the first science fiction novel, as it should be. Science fiction, of course, didn't exist, but this was certainly a forebearer of science fiction, if not the first science fiction novel. Just the amount of things that go on, how many different ideas and themes you can find in this story. It is a literary masterpiece. People don't always talk about it being as such. The writing style might not be masterful. A young woman wrote this. This is a melodramatic book. But if you, like I, have a high tolerance for melodrama, then you can accept that. And I think it adds to the story, frankly. I mean, this is a pretty melodramatic story, Frankenstein. Particularly the 1818 text, the one you want to read. This one with this fantastic cover. This is the one you want to get if you don't already have a Frankenstein. Pretty darn good book. And I recommend it wholeheartedly. It deserves its place as one of the greatest horror stories ever written. It is certainly one of my favorite novels. I think it is one of the greatest novels ever written. It will last forever. It is immortal, much like Frankenstein's monster himself. And now, of course, there's a reason that the character of Frankenstein and Frankenstein's monster have permeated our culture. Everybody thinks they know at least who Frankenstein is. Usually they think they're talking about the monster when they say Frankenstein. They're actually talking, well, you know who they're talking about. But certainly, Frankenstein will always be with us. This novel will always be with us. I kind of think everybody should read this book. So if you have not read this book, like whatever you're reading, it's like, oh, wow, this cowboy romance novel is great. Put it down. Put down that cowboy romance. Throw out that Dean Koontz book. Pick this sucker up, because this book is fantastic. You can get back to the cowboy romance later, but read this book right now. I mean, whatever you're reading, toss it aside and get this and read it right now. You need to read this, because you never know what might happen. Read this book before whatever might happen happens. This book is fantastic. Frankenstein, the 1818 text by Mary Shelley. Now go watch It's Too Late to Apologize to get the smart person's version of a review. Okay, guys, I will catch you tomorrow here at Stately Vaughan Manor. Bye, guys.